Welcome to the Painting Insights podcast. We have been working on something in the background.
That's right. We've actually started a Patreon channel. For the last couple of months, we've had previous guests revisit the channel to give us additional content, everything from studio tours, sketchbook tours, talking us through the process of paintings and all kinds of additional treats, which you're exclusively going to see as a patron who supports the channel.
So by supporting us on Patreon, you help the channel keep going. There's a lot of work put into this, from the video editing to the sourcing of guests. So you really help us find those guests and to put the content out.
And we have lots of content planned for the near future. So the links for that will be in the description of this video and in the description on the podcast channels. And otherwise, you can go on to Patreon and type in Painting Insights Podcast and support us that way. Thanks very much. Enjoy the video. So would you mind introducing yourself for the audience, please?
Hello, sure. I'm Dan Marshall. I'm a artist and painter in watercolor based in Denver, Colorado.
Fantastic. You absolutely beautiful paintings. I've been really admiring all of your work. And you also teach, is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So I teach a lot of workshops throughout the country with different either art associations or different watercolor societies. And COVID kind of led me to build up this whole kind of online platform. So at danmarshallart.com, I also have a lot of sort of pre-recorded content and tools to improve watercolor painting. And I think a lot of the difference of my focus is on sort of foundational art truths, not just making wine and paint copies of watercolor paintings. So there's a lot of very solid foundational instruction, which is kind of lacking in the world of watercolor. So,
yeah. Well, I'd like to get into some of those truths, but first I just want to make just clarify, is it exclusively online that you teach, or do you also teach in person?
So I do teach in person. I just got back from Maine. I'm teaching a workshop out in Maine. I'm heading out to St. George, Utah, which is gorgeous kind of canyon country in the world of all those great old Western painters. Too many to mention, but so I travel throughout the country. I don't do a whole lot of, well, I guess I don't do any like home studio teaching. I keep all my teaching either to online or in person that I get to travel cool places to. So
nice.
Keeps it more interesting for me and gives destinations for people like Mexico and fun places to have a learn and experience of being totally immersed in that idea of creation, and sometimes in a fun location.
So what would you say are the pros and cons of online teaching? Because I know that in person you get to have a real connection with people, and online that can create some kind of a barrier. Are there any pros that you found with online teaching?
So it's kind of funny because when I started, when we got locked down, right, we couldn't do anything, and I started doing online instruction and getting set up with all the recording things and learning that aspect of production. A pro is it really allows me to really deep dive into kind of trying to communicate some ideas without having the distraction of multiple people live around you. So there's a different kind of focus. But I really hated it at first. It felt so impersonal. It felt like, you would tell a joke and there's just silence. There's no one to like. I really enjoy like that rhetoric and the sort of bouncing back and forth and creating those personal connections. So I was missing that. And then when the first ban lifted and I went to do an in-person workshop, I'm like, oh my God, all these people are here. This is horrible. So it did. And now that I do both, I really enjoy both. There's like in person, you're getting a real life experience. You can see things from different angles. It's not just a fixed view. It's kind of the same as if you're painting from a photograph, or if you're painting from life, or drawing from life, or painting plein air. It's just a whole experience of sight, sound, textures, smells, all those things. So what I'm finding with a lot of like sort of kind of consistent students or repeat students is that they end up doing both, and they find that really beneficial. So there's pros and cons to both, but I do enjoy the producing stuff for the online stuff, and a lot of what I do online is live. Initially, it's live, and then it's offered as recordings. So there is still some of that camaraderie building and kind of community building within the learning experience. So
yeah, a bit of a compromise between the two is always good, isn't it?
Yeah.
So can we get into what are some of the truths? Is there anything you can share with us about the truths of art making that you mentioned earlier?
So when I refer to that, I'm really speaking about those things that are mediumless, right? So, composition, design, color theory, communication, and that's become a huge point of focus of me lately. And, the idea of images to communicate that are, predate the written word or a written language. We think of cave paintings, and what this guy is with a spear, and what this thing that's not a human and it's a cow. So that idea of communicating in a way that it feels real, because your brain will say, well, that's not a car, it looks more like a boat. That looks like water, it doesn't look like grass. So that idea of just stating enough to communicate the idea of the subject that you're painting, rather than getting too locked into all these like nouns and the idea of like over describing things. So that's become a big focus, and probably the hardest flip to find, to even begin to switch it, is to disconnect what our brains want to associate things as. Because when we get onto a flat surface, the laws of the universe don't apply to the laws of our mediums that we're working in. So that's kind of become an obsession, I would say, over the last, well, it's always sort of been aware of it, but I'm really focusing into kind of communicating that idea to really instill that sort of personal representation, personal growth, personal vision of what you want to paint, rather than just, I want to paint like this guy, or I want to paint like this guy. So it gives you the ability to kind of develop a personal voice and vision, rather than something that's just too derivative, I guess is a fun word to use. So,
Yeah.
but in the representational world, I mean, everything's kind of derivative. Like when you're in an idea of, I find this beautiful, or I find this intriguing, I want to communicate something with the light, or something I'm seeing with this, depending on your medium, there's lots of different ways to do that, and color choices, but it's really, you're still going to get certain things that may call similarities to a different artist, just because of the medium and the limitations, or the benefits of that medium. So finding ways to break out of bring your own honesty and individuality into what you're doing, even if it is reminiscent of greats who came before us. That's how we stand on the backs of giants. And it's different than making a political statement or trying to change the world. I just want to make pretty pictures that feel good to me and invoke a sense of dreamlike memory of a situation or place, rather than a completely accurate representation of that. And that's, anyway, so that's kind of a big piece of what gets me really excited, and that I'm kind of about. So,
well, it's a great subject. I love the idea of helping someone find their voice through their artwork, which is something we haven't really discussed very often. But I am wondering whether you're able to teach people if there is a line that you can draw between influence and a master study or a plagiarism of some kind. Is that something which you've explored deeply at all?
So, I had a mentor. I was very lucky to have a very close personal relationship with a living master. And it's Joseph Zbukvic. He's the Australian watercolor master. And I spent 5 years in a very close relationship with him as I was growing out of, I was a professional world traveling tattooer, and I decided I want to go back to more of my fine art kind of roots. And, there was definitely a point of having to sort of sever that relationship in a way. To be able to then take what I learned, or I was influenced by in my own direction from that. So there's, and and a lot of that had to do with broadening my inspirations, diving deeper into the things that I really find inspiring. I don't look at really a whole lot of, I don't really look at much modern watercolorists or current watercolorists, but I look at a lot of old ones, and everything from another Australian of Arthur Streeton from the early 1900s into Arthur Melville, the Scottish Orientalist watercolor and oil painter. Dean Cornwell, who was from the golden age of American illustration, and a lot of his peers. So, what I ended up doing was diving way back into inspirations and finding influence in basically anything pre-1937. So, back into the idea of, again, and that leads into this foundational art truths. There were ideas from the age of reason on mathematical formulas and composition, and that idea of division of space that feels good into our cellular level of like, why does that composition feel so good? Because it's fucking perfect, so those ideas of when you get into like modern art and fully abstract art, and you start to get into post World War II stuff, it becomes less of less of importance. So for the stuff that I wanted, I had to go back and dig deeper to find what I was looking for and broaden my vision, broaden my awareness of different works. And but I do master copies. I have students do demo copies, but I do this like 6-month atelier program class, and the idea is to start with this master copy to follow what I may have thought of or suggested that maybe these are things you should think about or try, but then you have to take those and produce your own image from your own reference using the techniques that were discussed that month. So it fosters this idea of, okay, this is how it was done when Dan did it, but how can I take that information and start to internalize it, to process it, to make it my own and find my own ways within a sort of framework of the approach that I use in watercolor. And that leads to discoveries, it leads to your own, when you can discover something on your own and you have that sort of aha moment of this, not in like a Alan Partridge way, but in a just, it's, you really take ownership of the idea of, I figured that out. Okay. I was learning from someone, but you know what? I know they didn't tell me things for a reason, so I could figure them out. And now I'm trying to offer that to people that I work with, of saving some of those moments of self-discovery. But it's, it's informed. It's making informed experiments, intentional. They're not just accidents. They're questions that you start to want to ask to have answers for, and you'll find those answers within your own, process or explorations.
Well, yeah. It kind of touches on something that I did want to ask you. I was fortunate enough to have a friend/mentor guide me through the principles of watercolor and how it works, as opposed to how acrylic or gouache or oil paint works. Watercolor is a very, to me, a very foundational dynamic with the surface of how you use it. And I was wondering if you could outline that for the audience, for anyone who's not aware of the kind of power of the surface area and the layers of watercolor and how that uses the luminosity of light bouncing off it and things like that.
Right. So, like for most other mediums, you're painting dark to light, right? And watercolor switches that. So me coming from a tattoo background of essentially black and gray rendered illustrations, essentially, I'm already clued into kind of working in a reverse in a way, and also the idea of visualizing and mapping out the end result versus the beginning process, and the ability to start to and it may be ADHD, I don't know, but it's this idea of I can set up these dominoes that lead from here to across the pond, and I'll know how to get across by these dominoes that I've already set up before I even pick up my brush. And then within those anticipations, it allows me to be improvisational and let go of ego and control, and then become a collaborator with the medium. So the strongest paintings from people, the paintings I enjoy, the type of painting I like to do in a more expressive, impressionist, representational kind of way. There is most people I talk to, like, oh, watercolor's so hard, and I can't do this, I can't control it, I can't do that. It's, well, you're not. It's like you're trying to put diesel gas into your, regular gas car. You're just not working with the medium or adjusting or being flexible. So I think there's a very big element of finding satisfaction and result by being able to, maybe this painting is not what you initially thought it was going to be. It could still be a good painting. You just allow that process to happen. And, with the medium itself, it's not a skin that's reflecting light on the support, right? So the idea of oil painting, hitting that skin, bouncing back at you, same thing with acrylics. There are things with watercolor that you need to allow that light to enter, hit the paper, and then reflect back. And that's how you're getting that translucency and those feelings of light. And if you're not careful, and you haven't planned, and you just keep hammering away and loading and loading and loading, every time you touch that, you're robbing the medium of its essence. So that, paintings can tend to look very heavy-handed, very ham-fisted. It may still be an interesting image, but you're going to lose the sensitivity and the elegance and the beauty of the medium. So in my approach, it's basically, I am working light to dark. I'm making sure I know where all those light tones or colors are first. And then it comes back into putting in sort of medium tones and darks. And then at the very end, sort of punching up any real darks on top of that to create separation or cut shapes apart. But it becomes a fairly rigid process for me, in the sense of, I'm working background to foreground and then putting in my middle ground. I'm working top to bottom, back to front. It becomes, in each object, it then becomes back to front, and that back ends up being what is the highlight. That actually, I call it the back, it would actually be the front, but you need to reserve that light. So in the formula of that, it's become so internalized and so necessary that when I paint, I paint in a much more fluid way than that. But it's on top of this understanding of knowing what I need to do. So again, going back to what I teach, I'm teaching what got me to the point of where I can paint this way. There's no way to sort of teach someone to paint at your current level, or I feel really strongly about that. If you're Jeremy Mann and he doesn't teach technique, but if you go and take a workshop, there's no possible way you can start where someone is currently, because there's a lifetime of experience that led up to that. So what I really try to do is bring certain techniques and certain ideas that will mix with that individual's lifetime of experience, of whether it's culture or lack of culture, or so then you become a vessel and a filter that comes in through you. It comes into your brain, out. It has to hit your heart, and then it's going to come down your arm and into your brush. And if you're not connecting in that emotional, spiritual way, you're going to make pictures that aren't going to say anything, so that I'm kind of rambling, but it's all tied into the process of what happens with watercolor. And I think I put that much importance on it, because you can't carve shape, wipe stuff out. You can't layer on top. You can't do all these things that you can do in other mediums to kind of sculpt your painting out of it. There's an element that you can do of that in watercolor, but it has not. You can't rearrange a composition once you're locked in. And I'm sure any watercolorist watching this know exactly what I'm talking about. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go get yourself a cheap set of watercolors and see how you do, because
it's a hard lesson to learn, but you have to learn.
It is. And, when I started, I was traveling all over the world with my tattoo career. And I said, I think I want to start I'm going to bring a memory of each city, town I go to. I'm going to do like a little street scene, or whatever. And I would say I'm an accomplished draftsman just from my training and then from my previous career. I love to draw, so that enables me to draw quickly. I can draw less for a painting because anyway. But what was happening was these paintings ended up looking like a fifth grader, or like an early development child painted these, and I'm like, I have a career in art. Why? Why is this happening? And that really spurred this obsession of I need to understand this medium. I need to fully learn how to exploit it. I need to know what I can get out of it, what I can put into it. And that drive has led me through my developmental career as so I've been probably maybe about 12 or 13 years is when that sort of first happened. And but it's not like I just discovered watercolor. I went to art school. I've had a lifetime of art. So it's really about, one, learning the medium, and then two, learning to relearn how to design not on a tube or a cylinder of an arm or something, and redesigning on flat paper. So there was a lot of self-study and a lot of deep diving into composition and color theory and those things. So,
well, now that you've developed an experienced framework and you've got almost a formula of this, top to bottom and back to front, and all these things which are just principles that work, is there still room for spontaneity, for discovery, for experimentation in the pieces that you make?
Oh yeah, that actually allows for that. That enables the idea of being able to explore and have fun, because and still end up with a result, right? So if I have this solid structure of an understanding of how things are going to read in the painting, if I'm creating a sense of depth or a sense of mood or light, you can have it all planned out, and watercolor is going to slip the banana peel under you. And the benefit of that is, I would say most of my paintings are a thought out, controlled series of what most people would find to be mistakes or errors in their painting. So the idea of remembering exactly how a certain thing happened and then being able to harness that and use it later in the future. So I used to be friends with a guitar player, right? Like a famous heavy metal band guitar player. I'm not going to say who they are. Everyone knows who they are, but these guys were like the high school nerds, you know what I mean? And he said, the only reason I got to be in the band and then develop into what I developed is because I could remember what I did. That's the only reason. He said, I'm not any more talented than anyone else. So that idea of being fully aware of what's happening and being able to recognize that and reproduce it is, I keep finding examples through different artistic ventures of how that really helps, and when I'm painting, it's even, painting from life or painting from a photo. When I paint from a photo, I look at it at the beginning. I may never look at it once the painting's happening because I'm taking care of that painting. So this idea of painting from memory, that goes, if you've read The Art Spirit by Robert Henri, I have a copy. Oh no, it's on my mantle at
I'll
home.
insert it.
But the it's The Art Spirit, and there's a whole, it's letters. It's written in 1902 or something. I don't know, at the Art Students League, dealing with students, and there's a whole section on the idea of putting the model in another room, looking at the model, walking over to the studio room, doing as much as you can do, going back, taking a look. So even when we're drawing anything, when we look up and we look back down, we're still holding that memory. So what I've tried to really build is this muscle of visual memory. So if I'm doing a street scene, I don't care if there's people there. I don't care if they're moving. When you're plein air painting, no one's going to just say, stand in the middle of the street for 20 minutes while I do this. So it's building this ability to take a mental snapshot, and that goes into the visual language of, I need a person. I don't need a specific, I need something that feels human here. And I can pull from that memory bank, or just take a glance and catch that 1 second and then draw it in real quick. So it's the idea of spontaneity, the idea of improvisation, the more you are not worrying about your drawing, the more you're not worrying about composition, the more you're not expending that mental energy into, and that's where those art truths become, the more when you can so internalize them that, like, I don't, this isn't a brag, or it's probably an error, but I don't really do thumbnail sketches anymore. I don't do no-tan sketches anymore. When I look at a scene, my brain separates it into a no-tan sketch. It's basically a black and white, it's a Japanese design concept of, if it's a mid-tone light, it goes to white. If it's a mid-tone dark, it goes to black. And you get this complete separation of a tone. But what people don't know is I also have done probably 2,000 no-tan sketches with either a brush or marker as I'm trying to build the ability to then have that. So when I'm not thinking about all those things, when I'm entering the creative process, I can get really creative with edge work and brush control, having things run into another, creating lost and found edges of things just merging into together. And it's not even tiring, because that's the only thing I've thought about in this whole process, because everything else is built on experience and study and hard work, so like the shortcuts in art, the shortcut is, maybe these are some things you can look at to develop yourself. There's no jumping over that and thinking you're going to be the next John Singer Sargent or whatever. So it's, it's art is long and time is fleeting, is the famous quote. So
yeah, I mean, it sounds, a lot of people don't like the term rules in art, but I quite like it, because I think that rules can be bent and they can be broken, but they should be learnt so that you know when you're abiding by them or breaking them consciously. And it sounds like with watercolor, there are very good rules to learn so that you understand the principles of how the medium will serve you and the image. And I'm wondering, are there any rules that you break? And whilst you think for a moment, just so you know, some artists will have a rule, and this isn't for watercolor, but for generally painting, some artists will say, I don't use black. My brother always says, I think you should use black, but use it to kill the chroma in your color, because you can do that with the complementary color. But if you do it with black, it does it differently and it does it much quicker. And you can be efficient with plein air painting. So that's a rule that he breaks, because he said, rules are great to learn, but then learn how to bend and break them for your advantage.
Absolutely. And to me, there's a difference between a crutch and a shortcut, or a broken rule that you use to your advantage. So, to take some lamp black and throw some cadmium yellow in it, and you've got a really cool muted green, like a very neutral kind of color. And I could probably make that with my cobalt turquoise and a little red, and throw a little maybe throw a little burnt sienna in there, because it always just comes down to the primaries, right? Like different versions of combinations of red, blue, and yellow. That's all you get, So my palette, it's only a warm and cool primary. There are a couple secondaries in there just for richer versions of a secondary. But the idea of the horizon in the middle of the paper, never do that. Well, I can do it, and I can tell you why it's going to work. And I learned that from looking at Homer paintings. So go look at a bunch of Homer watercolors or paintings. Look how many he'll have the horizon in dead center, but then it's weighted. So the visual weight pulls that line down, and it doesn't matter that the horizon's in the center. Mm-hmm. So I love discovering those things, and then like, oh, I got away with one. Like you feel fancy, because otherwise things can get, if you're always, the horizon line should be on the bottom third in a rule of third. Well, no, it shouldn't. It just should be somewhere around there, So I call them composition hand grenades, because if you get close, you might accidentally just fall into a fucking golden ratio when you were trying to stick with the rule of thirds. And it's a wonderful thing to understand and acknowledge that those things happen once you get used to. My world becomes whatever ratio I'm working in at that time, and everything I'm doing is happening in there, regardless of what's happening in reality. Mm-hmm. But I think other rules, I'll use gouache. I'll use a little white gouache here and there. I love, there's a color from Holbein watercolors. It's just lavender. It's pretty opaque and it's really fun. And I use it in almost every landscape. When I'm done, I might just dance a couple little strokes of a sort of medium consistency lavender in there just to cool things down a little bit back there. And it looks painterly. It looks amazing. But it's not right, you know. And the other rules that I break are the idea that my $150 brushes are tools. It's a tool, and it's going to end up looking like that, you know, when it's supposed to be this lovely Sable. It's a tool designed to be used to create effects. And you know, in a lot of my workshops, I have people who they're accomplished painters in a way of an approach to making watercolors that I don't care to look at. So I don't know how to say that nicely, but there's just, you know, they're tight. They're trying to be realistic, but failing at being realistic, and they just end up being somewhere in this zone of something your grandma might do at her senior center. You know, it's not art. It's maybe decorator art. It's not high fine art. You're making pictures. You know, like that's great. If you want to be a weekend holiday painter and enjoy that, that's fine. I aspire to something deeper, something more magical and invested in living life as an artist, and the approach that brings into the way all these creative things filter. So it's not just coming in here and making a picture, you know. But that idea of most watercolor, you know, you've got this beautiful Winsor Newton Series 7 or this beautiful kind of Sable brush, and it's got this little thing, and you're dipping in your water and you're making a little dip here, and you know, you're painting in this pedantic kind of adult coloring book, filling in the blanks. And so one of the big rules I make break in the handling of the medium is, yeah, I'm starting with beautiful translucent washes. Everything beyond that is a way of making a mark and creating an edge that may not subscribe to the way of, well, I'm doing this tree, I better put all these leaves. I'm going to take that brush and mash it and create an energetic mark with a tool that I can get away with that brings something of emotion and movement and quality that is not, it can't be planned. You can learn techniques of doing things like that, but it's you know, usually at my workshops, in the in-person ones, you know, they're very dedicated students. They're very a lot of them paint a lot, but they can't get over the fact of what I may have paid for that brush and what I am now doing with it. And it's like, you should see my car, you know, like it's you know, the car gets me from A to B, but it's also my painting encampment and, you know, mobile studio, all these things that, you know, so you're taking advantage of, you know, tools, and things wear out, you know. I just had to get new ball joints on my car. They don't last forever. Brushes aren't meant to last forever. You know, some of my bigger, you know, like, I use a lot of squirrel mop brushes. For those of you who don't know, it's very soft. It's got a bigger belly, so it holds a lot more pigment. Some of these I've had since I've started painting, because all I'm doing is picking up very thin pigment. There's a very delicate touch on the paper, so it's not being, and I'm using rough paper mostly, so that roughness starts to break down bristles, things deteriorate. But, you know, I've got mops that I've had for, you know, probably even before I was dedicated painting. I probably have 20-year-old mops that are still fine. They're just designed they almost look like makeup brushes, you know. They're just designed to put on some rouge.
Yeah.
So
That is nice with watercolor. You get incredibly soft brushes. You know, I spoke to a chap called Scott Taplin last year, and he's a great illustrator, really nice guy in New York. And he mentioned that the quality of Sable brushes, because he does a lot of watercolor painting, he said that the quality is decreased over late last year. Did you experience that at all? Where he said that the bristles will ping out where they used to stay true for
Oh, well, like the kind of release. Yeah. So I think, there's been a lot of movement around the collection and treatment of Sable.
Mm.
So that raises the price. And honestly, in my painting career, I've never been like a Sable guy. Like so, I'm much more into squirrel brushes. There's squirrels everywhere. So, but there are, even with getting, like, you buy an expensive high quality brush, I'll never go straight onto a painting with it, because a lot of times you will get some stray hairs pulling out and stuff. And I have a couple of these really cool brushes from China, and these are like there's double hairs in here. One is like goat. I think one might be bear. I mean, you get weird. I went to China a couple of years ago. You get crazy stuff. They just don't have the same rules, right? So, but one I got, and I was like, oh, this brush is going to be so cool. And for about a week, it kept leaving these. It finally settled down, but and I guess there's no really way to know. It just, when you're using a natural bristle brush, there's always that inherent risk that you're going to lose a few hairs here and there. And the synthetics are getting there. I still haven't used a synthetic squirrel that is quite as good, or a synthetic sable that's quite as good, but I'll tell you, they're better than they were even 6 years ago. So like the technology of producing those synthetics is getting there. But the other thing I will use, the one synthetic I'll use, it's just a white Taklon, and this is from a company called Escoda, and it's not meant to do washes. It's meant, you can do lovely calligraphy with it. You can use thicker pigment with it. It's great for mark making, but it's again, it's all those contrasts: soft brush, hard brush, light, dark, translucent, opaque. All those things kind of add up to create interesting images, or what I find interesting anyway.
Well, I was wondering as well, as far as the brand of paint, is there anything which you find your preference, or you're quite happy mixing it up? Because I can imagine the strength of the pigments varies between manufacturers.
So yeah, I mean, can I mention brands? Like, is that?
Please, yeah, absolutely. That's what we want.
Okay, so like, as far as brands go, there's basically two camps, right? You have gum arabic as a carrier, or you have honey-based pigment. And I was really excited for the Michael, he's an English guy, Michael Harding. Michael Harding released a line of watercolors. They are super intense, gorgeous, beautiful. They're honey-based. Honey and gum arabic don't really play well together. So if you want to use honey, make sure the carriers are all honey in your pigments. I'm more of a tonal painter. I'm less concerned about super high chromatic vibrations and things. I'm no Stephen Quiller, right? He's sort of like the modern master of color of watercolor, and he's written all kinds of color theory books. They're great books, but I'm not going for that. I'm going for something softer. So I tend to use gum arabic paints, and basically there's three brands that I use. I use Daniel Smith. I use mostly Winsor Newton, and I use a couple Holbein colors. And that developed from either chemists at the company changing, so different formulas changed. I used to love Winsor Newton's earth tones. I don't like them anymore, so I switched to Daniel Smith's earth tones. I greatly dislike Daniel Smith's cadmiums and cobalts. I stick with those with my Winsor Newton. It's more of a traditional kind of thing there. And the Holbeins are they just lend a little bit of opacity. So really, all I use in Holbein is I use a hot pink. I can't tell you why. It's just sometimes it comes in handy. And I use a lavender, but I use one modern color, and it's a Pyrrole orange that I use from Daniel Smith. But I don't use any quinacridones. I don't use any of those synthetic and kind of staining colors, because I want a more traditional, classy look to my paintings. That's what I like. So my palette is designed around facilitating that, and it's all about mixing tones and colors and not grabbing a tube, like the famous question of, oh, what color is that? All of them, because then it's also translucent and the color below it is showing through. So that's the other thing that's awesome about watercolors is the idea of glazing, glazing like in any medium, but in watercolor it's designed for that. But I am also very sparing in how much I'll glaze. So, in that idea of, but there's also wonderful advancements in the crazy, amazing colors, so if that's the look that you want to do or what you want to punch, and every now and again, I'll come home with a new tube and see if it plays well in my palette or if I want to use that as an accent color or something. So it's, there's always new things to discover, new colors being produced, new things coming around. But, I guess another just quick example of that is Winsor Newton's burnt sienna goes a lot more yellow now than it used to. Daniel Smith's burnt sienna goes really pink. It goes into this lovely, lovely, lovely kind of pinkish salmon-y color when you mix it out with water. And I found that more useful to my palette than what the current Winsor Newton one is doing. And that, I'm probably oversensitive, but when you paint as much as I do, you can't help but clue into there's something different with this paper production. Something isn't right. Something's not the same. Or, I dislike qualities of arch paper, like it becomes I just don't care for it. It doesn't do what I want it to do. I like Saunders Waterford a lot, and there's a lot of history of watercolor in England. Winsor Newton and St. Cuthbert's Mill have history and they're doing things right, But I also recently like Hahnemühle paper from Germany. It's a newer version of what they're doing, and it's very bright white, which I don't normally like. But with doing the Western landscapes and living in Colorado now and the painting New Mexico and these things, I really have found a way to love it. And so I use kind of both papers depending on what that final outcome is going to look like with what I'm going for in the painting. Whether if it's more tonal, I'm going with the Saunders Waterford. If I need more punchy brights and light and feeling of there's no atmosphere here in Colorado. Everything is crisp. So that paper really lends itself to being able to communicate that in the painting. So I'll kind of, I travel with both papers. I use both as often as the other. But it's, you develop these little sensitivities of nuance and that's where you can really start to, when you pay attention to that, you can really start to fine tune what you're using, how you're using it, what that result is going to, that predictable result is going to kind of be. And it's a lifestyle. No, I don't know. I'm just kidding. But it does become it is such an obsession. There isn't a day if I don't paint that day, I've thought about painting. And if I'm on a road trip and driving, I've made probably 500 compositions in my head as I'm going down the road. So it becomes something that you can't turn off, and the enjoyment and the love of that is what I really try to help people that find in their, I don't like to call it a journey. There's these very common watercolor catchphrases of my watercolor journey. Yeah. And I nix the journey and I call it an adventure, because adventures are fun. Adventures are unpredictable. Adventures are exploration. There are these things. Journey is like, it's to toil, carrying all this stuff. I gotta go, so that idea of an adventure and embracing the unpredictability and being able, but it's great when you can sort of anticipate unpredictability and then learn to control. And I really put it more as being a conductor with the medium rather than the guy playing the tuba. You're sort of like saying, why do you do that? And maybe a little bit more over here. So that back and forth rapport that you build when you are in that meditative bubble of creativity, and it's a trance, like if you allow yourself to just sink in and this is your whole being for this amount of time that you're painting. It's exciting and it's wonderful. And I love when I see people hit that moment where like, oh my God, what just happened? You know, like it's like they get, they finish the painting and they're like yanked back to reality. And, you know, it's like, anyway, it's lovely to see people embrace that and enjoy it and not just sit there and say, well, this is green and this is blue, you know, and that's art making, but it's not like true intuitive personal creation, you know, to me. And then I will preface all of that with not that there's anything wrong with that. If you are enjoying what you are creating and the way you're creating it, do it. Don't change it. Don't get all confused and frustrated with what I do. I don't have kids. I got time to do this, right? So, you know, I'm always excited to see. You know, sometimes I get totally rank beginners in a workshop that's billed as like an intermediate advanced workshop. I'm grateful that they're there because they come with this openness and I don't have to break bad habits and, you know, try to force you into a different way of thinking or anything. And so, you know, art making at any level, especially nowadays with digital and AI and living your life in your phone, you know, anyone doing anything analog that's creative, thank God that there's still an interest in that. And anyway, and a resurgence of gouache painting, thanks to things happening in the video game industry and concept art and things. You know, when I was in art school, gouache was an old medium that designers used, and it stayed that way up until about, I don't know, 5 years ago, and now all of a sudden everyone's doing gouache, which is great. But it was I'm like, didn't see that coming. You know, didn't see this resurgence of that. But there's also a youthful push in it, and it's tied into the whole idea of you know, urban sketching and, you know, all these things that are attached. You know, I love getting anything under 30 in a workshop, and I'm like, yes, great. You know, like, you know, get to kind of inspire. I'm 50. I'm in my 50s, and it's, you know, I don't want to think that everyone who wants to learn how to paint is going to be dead in 20 years in my current, you know, sort of workshop demographic. I mean, I luckily I do get a pretty wide range of stuff, but it's, you know, there's a generation right now that has time and money and a desire to reconnect to the creativity that they avoided while they were building families and careers, and now they have the time and money, you know. So, and they're lovely people, and they're, you know, it's pretty rare that you get someone who's a pill when they're there to enjoy the time and create and just spend the week painting, you know. So it's but I'm grateful for the youth and new movements that create excitement and get people off of, even if they're doing mixes between digital and analog, still embracing that idea of creation on a flat 3-dimensional surface. Flat. I mean, it's not 3D, but it's in the real world. You know, so. Anyway,
it's not digital. Yeah, no, I'm very optimistic. I can see that interest circling back round. You know, I could talk to you for another hour, but sadly we are at the end of our time. So where would you like our viewers and listeners to go to see your work, to support you? Where would you send them?
Well, thank you very much. You can go to danmarshallart.com or at danmarshallart. You can email me at danmarshallart. I try to keep everything Dan Marshall Art, 2 L's. There's a big section of just work you can look at on my website. There's a separate section if you want to add to your collection. From time to time, I do posters that are very cost effective for adding a interesting piece of art. And then there's a whole section that is a learning platform on there that has, I think I'm up to 18, I call them master classes. I do them once a month, so there's a thing on there where you can see what the live master class of that month may be. And then there's a library of the recorded versions, and those things are like 4 to 5 hours long. So they're intensives. And but I would love to have you check them out, and I check out my workshops upcoming. I'd rather see you in person. It's great. We have a lot of fun at my workshops, and there's lots of jokes. And you know, this is just me. There's no teaching persona. There's no, no, we're going to, so I like energy. I like to keep things exciting and personable. And, but thank you so much for the opportunity to get to know you a little bit and talk with you. And I'm honored to be on your podcast. So thank you so much.
All the links will be in the description of wherever you find the podcast. And we really do encourage all of our viewers and listeners to go and support the artist and check out the links. Your work is absolutely beautiful. We'll have to get you back on again because there was tons of questions that I would have asked you, but the time just flew by. You're such a perfect guest. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. Anytime.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you can support the podcast by leaving a like or a comment down below, that would really be great. But what we'd really like is if you're able to leave a review on the podcast channels, wherever you listen to it or download it, because that helps us get spread around the internet so that more people have access to us and able to see what we're making.
Also, follow us on Instagram, and we'd really appreciate it if you like and engage with our posts. Help get the podcast better known. Thanks for listening.